Welcome to the Haunted Channel 666. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. If you hear a clicking sound coming from your basement, hit the like button immediately. Also, ignore the eyes coming from the woods. They aren't watching you. They are watching for the subscribe button. Brave Emily. The sun was setting as Emily sorted through her mail. She stopped at an envelope with a picture of a lush forest and the words, "Join us on a hiking adventure," written in bold letters. Emily's heart raced as she read the details of the invitation. It was from a group of hikers who were planning to explore the mysterious Lost Woods, a place that was rumored to be cursed. Emily had always been intrigued by the Lost Woods, but she was also scared. She had heard stories of hikers getting lost and never returning, of strange creatures lurking in the trees, and of a ghostly figure that haunted the forest. But the invitation was too tempting to resist. Emily wanted to prove to herself that she was brave enough to face her fears. After some hesitation, she decided to accept the invitation. The date and time were set for the following weekend, and Emily spent the rest of the night researching the Lost Woods, trying to learn as much as she could about the dangers that lay ahead. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a huge mistake. The day of the hike arrived, and Emily met up with the other hikers at the entrance to the Lost Woods. There were 6 of them in total, all strangers to Emily. They introduced themselves and exchanged nervous small talk as they prepared for the trek. The first part of the hike was relatively easy, with the group following a well-worn trail through the dense foliage. Emily marveled at the beauty of the forest, with its tall trees and vibrant undergrowth. But as they ventured further into the woods, she began to feel uneasy. The trees grew thicker and more twisted, blocking out the sunlight and casting deep shadows across the forest floor. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The other hikers seemed to sense it too, as they grew quieter and more tense. Suddenly, they heard a loud cracking sound, and Emily jumped. One of the hikers had stepped on a branch, causing it to snap. They all stopped and looked around nervously, but there was nothing in sight. "Let's keep moving," said the group leader, a tall man named Jack. "We need to reach the campsite before nightfall." As they continued down the trail, Emily felt a growing sense of dread. The forest was not what she had expected it to be, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in the Lost Woods. The group had been hiking for several hours when they realized that they had lost the trail. Panic set in as they tried to retrace their steps, but everything looked the same. Emily's heart raced as she thought about being lost in the woods overnight. The other hikers were starting to argue, blaming each other for getting lost. "We need to find a place to set up camp," said Jack. "We can't keep wandering aimlessly in the dark." Just then, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated, with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof, but it was better than nothing. "Let's stay here for the night," said Jack, and the other hikers reluctantly agreed. As they settled into the cabin, Emily couldn't help but feel uneasy. The air was thick with the smell of mold, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. She tried to make the best of the situation, setting up her sleeping bag in a corner and pulling out a granola bar to munch on. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The group heard rustling outside the cabin, and they heard eerie whispers in the wind. They started to see strange symbols etched into the walls of the cabin, symbols that they couldn't identify. Emily tried to brush it off as her imagination, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. She realized that the Lost Woods were more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and that they might never make it out alive. The night in the cabin was long and restless for Emily and the other hikers. Strange noises continued throughout the night, and they all felt like they were being watched. As dawn broke, they were relieved to see the sun rising and to be able to leave the cabin behind. As they resumed their hike, the forest seemed even more sinister than before. The air was thick with mist, and they could barely see a few feet in front of them. Emily felt like they were being led in circles, with the same trees and bushes appearing over and over again. The other hikers seemed just as lost and disoriented. Suddenly they heard a blood-curdling scream. They all froze, unsure of where it was coming from. Emily's heart raced as she tried to identify the source of the sound. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a dark figure moving in the trees. It was fast and elusive, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. She tried to tell the other hikers, but they brushed it off as her imagination. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Emily felt like they were being followed by an unseen presence, something dark and malevolent that was closing in on them. She knew that they needed to find a way out of the lost woods, and fast, before it was too late. Emily's fears were confirmed when they stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. There, they found evidence of a previous campsite, a tattered tent, discarded camping gear, and an abandoned backpack. It was clear that someone else had been lost in the woods, just like they were. As they continued to search the clearing, they heard a low growl coming from the trees. Emily's heart raced as she realized that they were being hunted. The unseen presence that had been following them was closing in. The hikers quickly gathered their belongings and started to run, but it was too late. They were surrounded by a group of strange, animal-like creatures. They were about the size of a large dog, with matted fur and glowing yellow eyes. Emily's stomach turned as she realized that they were not just animals, but something far more sinister. The creatures started to move in on the group, snarling and snapping their teeth. Emily tried to run, but one of the creatures lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. She screamed as it pinned her down, its hot breath on her face. Just when she thought it was over, she heard a loud gunshot. The creature fell to the ground, and Emily looked up to see Jack holding a smoking gun. The other hikers had managed to fend off the other creatures, and they quickly fled the clearing. As they ran through the woods, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being chased. She knew that they needed to find a way out of the lost woods before it was too late. The hikers continued to run through the woods, with the sounds of the creatures close behind them. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest as she stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep up with the group. Suddenly, they came to a stop at the edge of a steep cliff. Emily gasped as she looked down, seeing only jagged rocks far below. There was no way down, and no way back. They were trapped. As they tried to catch their breath, Emily noticed that one of the hikers was missing. She looked around frantically, trying to find him in the darkness. That's when she saw him, standing at the edge of the cliff, his eyes blank and unseeing. "Peter!" she screamed, but it was too late. He jumped from the edge of the cliff, plummeting to his death below. The other hikers were in shock, and Emily felt a wave of despair wash over her. They were trapped in the lost woods with no way out, and now they had lost one of their own. She knew that they needed to find a way to survive, or they would all end up like Peter. As they huddled together, trying to come up with a plan, Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her. She realized that they were being watched by something far more dangerous than the creatures in the woods. There was an unseen force, something dark and malevolent, that was driving them towards their own destruction. Emily knew that they needed to make a sacrifice to appease the force that was watching them. It was their only hope of making it out alive. She looked at the other hikers, knowing what she had to do. "We have to make a sacrifice," she said. "It's the only way we'll survive." The other hikers looked at her in horror, but Emily knew that it was the only way. She would have to offer herself up as a sacrifice, in the hopes that it would appease the dark force that was watching them. With a heavy heart, Emily stepped forward, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the group. When Emily stepped forward to make the sacrifice, the other hikers protested. They couldn't bear the thought of losing another member of their group. But Emily was resolute. She knew that it was their only chance of survival. She stepped forward towards the edge of the cliff, ready to jump. But just as she was about to take the leap, she heard a voice calling out to her from the woods. "Emily!" It was Jack's voice, and it sounded urgent. Emily turned around, and saw Jack running towards her, holding something in his hands. "I found it," he said, holding out a map. "The way out of the woods." The other hikers looked at the map in disbelief. It seemed too good to be true, but Emily knew that they had to trust Jack. They had to take a chance. They followed the map, hiking through the woods with renewed hope. As Emily and the other hikers emerged from the woods, they saw that they were at the edge of a small town. They had made it out, but something didn't feel quite right. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, and the town seemed deserted. As they cautiously made their way through the streets, they realized that something terrible had happened. The buildings were in ruins, and the streets were littered with debris. It was as if the town had been abandoned for years. Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her. They had escaped the lost woods, but what had they stumbled into? The hikers huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. They knew that they couldn't stay in the town for long, but they also knew that they couldn't go back into the woods. Suddenly, they heard a faint whispering sound. It seemed to be coming from all around them, but they couldn't make out the words. The sound grew louder and more insistent, until it was almost deafening. Emily realized that they were being summoned by something far more powerful than they had ever encountered before. She knew that they had to make a choice, and quickly. They could stay and face whatever was calling to them, or they could flee and hope to find safety elsewhere. As the hikers debated their options, they saw a figure approaching them from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, with wild hair and an expression of terror on her face. "Run!" she screamed, as she stumbled towards them. "You have to get out of here!" But before she could say anything more, she was pulled back into the darkness by an unseen force. The hikers were frozen in fear, unsure of what to do next. As they stood there, paralyzed, the whispering grew louder and more insistent. Emily knew that they had to make a decision, and fast. With a heavy heart, she turned to the other hikers and whispered, "We have to go back into the woods." They knew it was a dangerous choice, but it seemed like the only option. They turned and ran back towards the lost woods, hoping that they would find safety within its depths. As they disappeared into the darkness, the town fell silent once again. The only sound was the faint whispering, calling out for more souls to join its ranks. If you like our stories, make sure to like and subscribe. The charm of the horror only tempts the strong. The Haunted Channel 666 awaits you.